Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast with Zach Bitter. Welcome, everyone. If you enjoy the show, please consider subscribing on your favorite podcast listening platform and YouTube. You can also now check out the full video episode on X. Please also consider sharing your favorite episodes and leaving a review on your favorite platform. If you tag me or send me a screenshot, I will enter you in a monthly raffle for a free consultation with me. For full episode details, including notes, timestamps, transcripts, the show Patreon page, and other ways to support the show, please head over to my website at zachbitter.com. There you can find all my coaching services, including some new offerings for 2025. You can also sign up for my Substack newsletter, where I have been publishing my training journal weekly, as well as other topic-based posts. If you have any questions or feedback, please don't hesitate to reach out to me on my website or at hpopodcast@gmail.com. Big thanks to Element, Delta G Ketones, and Maui Nui Venison for supporting the podcast. A full description of how I use these products can be found at the end of the episode. Discounts, promotions, and details can also be found in the show notes and at the end of the episode. Bro, Dustin, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, man, excited to talk with you.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to diving into this topic. It's an exciting year for me because I chose to go unsponsored for the first year in 11 years. So I have my pick of the lot, as they say, when it comes to shoe choice. And I think that might be almost a necessity to some degree nowadays with the options we have out there and how people respond to some of the different products that are available.
Yeah, I mean, it's an exciting time for that, to have that option, right? Like, to be locked in and not be able to try everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I can relate in the sense, not as an elite athlete who has shoe sponsorships, but as a researcher, I have stayed independent of the shoe companies.
Sure.
And that's been a really fun thing to be able to do, because I can ask the questions I want, or the questions that like normal runners and consumers might want, as opposed to questions that maybe were driven by the shoe companies themselves. So,
yeah. Do the brands reach out to you though, just knowing kind of what you do?
So like I have some relationships with the product line, like the performance line guys at different brands,
yeah.
But not in like a, hey, let's do this research study together way.
Sure.
So it's like to not have any conflict of interest. The shoe companies traditionally have always been interested more in working with like biomechanists. So they got all the motion capture stuff and the force measuring treadmills. And my background is as an exercise physiologist. So like with the new super shoes, the big thing is like measuring running economy or, oxygen costs. So I've got the metabolic cart, like top level metabolic cart in my lab and stuff to do that, but less so much like the motion capture and all that. So, so traditionally I feel like most of the labs that are funded by shoe companies kind of are biomechanists type folks. And so that's one reason. And then the other reason, like I said, it's like kind of being able to look at the questions I want to look at. You're not gonna be able to do like a brand to brand comparison with this study that's sponsored by a shoe company.
Right. Yeah. I'd be curious to see like over the years or in the coming years if it's just something where they almost value the third party non-biased look, because I mean these brands all have their claims, right, of like 95% or 93% or whatever it happens to be. Right. But everyone probably looks at that through the same lens they do marketing, if it's coming from the brand
exactly
itself.
I think that's the point. Is like if you look at like original Vaporfly 4% study, it's like that was groundbreaking, and you probably wanted a third party lab to like put that out there, right? Yeah. And not just like have your own company claim for it. But then it's like, is it worth it to do that every time you have a release of a shoe, or can you rely on the marketing that comes from like, influencers and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like even I think I was thinking about this. The 3 years ago now, like the original super shoe study I did was like comparing multiple brands, and those are all like first iterations now, so it's dated, right?
Yeah.
But like that paper is probably like most downloaded read paper like I'll ever publish in my life. Like the preprint of that paper has like been downloaded like 50,000 times. But if you compare that to like a big social media influencer, right, they'll get that on like a single reel, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, when you think of what the brands would want to invest in, a published research study or like influencers who can share way more mass marketing content. Like there's,
it makes me think of when Adidas launched the $500 what they called the single use shoe.
Yeah.
And it was funny because there's like a bunch of the there was like only like I think maybe 500 of them made originally anyway. I don't know what they did with it eventually, but it was like fun to watch and see who got their hands on a pair of those.
Oh yeah,
And it
yeah.
was very strategic, you know,
Right,
they
right.
want, and I think with something like that, it's almost like you make a shoe like that. I guess like you could sell it, but you could also just take bits and pieces of that, what made that shoe, and put it in the rest of your models that you're going to sell more generally to the public, and say, hey, this is the midsole from that shoe or the
Yeah,
outsole from that shoe, and
yeah,
kind of use
yeah,
the marketing to drive different aspects of it.
yeah. And you got to figure in any of those like top tier racing shoes, that's still like such a small percentage of those companies like uh, revenues probably. So it's
Yeah.
more like having that out there and elite athletes wearing that and the brand image that comes with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't get the initial release, but then there was like a random release, like maybe almost a year after that. I got hands on those for a bit, so I did test those in the lab
Yeah.
on a few people. I didn't keep them.
Yeah, yeah. I want to get into kind of the variants, but then I also, it's one of those things too now where like if you look at a pro athlete and like you'll see a record get broken or something like that, or like the most recent example, Connor Mance breaks the American record in the half marathon, and you're like, oh, what shoes is he wearing? Well, it's probably a prototype that they got through the World Athletics like verification process, and is maybe not quite ready for the public yet. Is that what you see generally, or?
I mean, I think there's a lot of records now that have been set in at least shoes that are now like available for the market, right? The World Athletics' rule is like, I'd have to look at the exact language of it, but like if it is a prototype, it has to be something that's going to be released
Yeah.
within a certain number of months. And I think it's a little wishy-washy on exactly what that looks like, but or like they'll have a small release so they don't break that rule. But I'd say my take, probably most of the technology that's breaking records is at least stuff that, if not already on the market, will soon be on the market. I don't know that they're having
Really
stuff
long
that's
tails.
like there's like such a breakthrough prototype thing that no one else exposed. So like early on when you had like the everyone running in 4%, right?
Yeah.
And people like spray painting their shoes and things like that. Like I don't think we're there anymore.
Yeah. I guess before we get into the weeds, we should probably just let everyone know who you are, what you're up to, what kind of got you into kind of this side of the world with shoe testing and things like that. So what was your like original launch into the shoe testing type stuff?
Yeah. So my story, lifelong runner, mediocre collegiate runner that was injured all the time. Always interested in sports science on like how to be faster, right? So that kind of led me to like PhD in exercise physiology. I was always interested in endurance performance, and 3-4 years ago got into like more running economy, so like measuring oxygen consumption, energy expenditure in the lab while people are running at a fixed speed to like determine how much energy it takes to run at that speed. And that kind of became more research focused the last few years, but kind of stimulated by the release of super shoes. So this is, 2016 you got Rio Olympics when like Vaporflies come to the scene. So until that stuff's like really available in the market 2-3 years later, like is when I started testing stuff like that in my lab. And I was interested in, at the time it was like all the podiums at World Marathon majors were, Vaporfly 4% shoes. And I had picked up a pair of, what were they? Hoka Carbon X, I think, like the first iteration. And I was like, oh, okay, carbon plated shoe. And like, I could feel the stiffness in it, right?
Yeah.
And like, I trained for a marathon in those, and that didn't have a great marathon, probably more on me than the shoe. But then I was about to buy a second pair, and the Alpha Fly were out at this point. The original Alpha Fly. And I was like, well, before I buy a second pair of these, I'm going to like test them in the lab, right?
Yeah.
So I tested that original Hoka carbon plate shoe against just like a regular old flat in the lab, and like my running economy was the exact same on the regular old flat and that. And I was like, okay, am I a non-responder, right? This term's been thrown around. Or is it the shoe? And so then I picked up the Alpha Fly, and I was like 4% benefit right out of the box. And I was like, okay, this is something different, right? Like originally that just like played in the shoe, I could feel the stiffness, but then like, that original Alpha Fly, like this is something different. And so, so that kind of sparked the interest in like doing a brand comparison.
Yeah.
And so that's, what is that? That's 20, I'm losing track of years. I have to
Like 21 when the...
I think that study we got out 2021. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of my biggest kind of like I wish we could go back and see again stories is with that launch of Hoka's first one. They did that whole like what was it? It was the Carbon X, I think it was Project something. It was a 100K race. So they had like a bunch of their ultra runners out there, and Jim Walmsley was going for the world record for 100K, which at the time I think was like 6:09 or something like that. And he ended up falling like 11 seconds or 9 seconds shy of it. And everyone's like, okay, well, this is a super shoe. What would he have run in a normal shoe? And then once we get all the research, it turns out he was basically probably running in the control shoe. And it's like, I wonder what he would have done in a Vaporfly. Maybe he goes closer to low 6, break 6 hours maybe.
Yeah, I definitely think, I mean, that shoe, and I haven't tested the most recent iteration. They didn't, that shoe still had old EVA foam. It was like a flat plate, not much of a rocker on it. Whereas I think the newer iterations of like Hoka Super Shoes are
they've got like Piba foam in there. I think on the new ones,
Yeah, so I'd expect those to test better if we redid that kind of study again. But yeah, definitely I think athletes who were in that shoe at that time probably definitely had a disadvantage.
Yeah,
and that's not just from my personal data. That was like the first study we did where we had 6 or 7 different super shoes in the lineup, and that was one of the ones that was kind of a dud. That it was equivalent to the control shoe, like across the whole group, not just an individual person.
Yeah, and you wonder how much of that is just Nike kind of comes out a little bit under the radar at first. Like I don't know how available the information of what they were working on to other brands seemed like none essentially. So they launched that shoe, and then it's sort of okay, we got to catch up here. But when you look at just shoe design and how that ends up playing out, you're usually looking at 12, 18 months before you can take a shoe to market after the kind of the first prototype. And when you're talking about something that high, kind of that super shoe foam, that a new invention essentially, it's just like a crazy catch-up time frame. So I just wonder about sometimes when brands were coming out with their first models, they were just trying to get something to market as quick as they could to have something, and then hoping to build off of it over the years and try to catch up to Nike essentially.
Yeah, I bet that's probably fair. I mean, without talking to like the product line guys within individual companies, I'm sure some of the bigger companies probably had their own R&D going on that was working on similar things. But I think if you just look at how the market responded to that, like everything was about carbon plate, right? Carbon plate. Yeah. Like everyone just stuck a carbon plate in the shoe, and that's what we realized is like, well, the carbon plate alone is not doing most of it, right? Like the foam was bigger part of that story. And that's what I think started to catch up across brands now, probably.
Yeah. That's the other interesting thing, too, because at first it was like Piba foam, right? Like that was the foam that was more likely to produce the better energy return. Am I right that like now you're starting to see non-Piba foams that are starting to catch up, at least in some circumstances?
Yeah, that's the foam tech, and talking about the foam tech is tricky to me because saying something's EVA, something's Piba, like that's the big distinction. But like how you take that like chemical soup and turn it into foam, like there's a lot of variation in the properties of Piba. Like even within Nike shoes, like Zoom X that's in the Invincible is slightly different than the Zoom X that's in their racing shoes. And so that's all Piba though, right? Like, and you can make like Piba that's like a hard plastic looking plate, or you can make it this foamy cushy thing. So it's like, I think there's a lot of chemical engineering and like the foaming of the midsole that probably need to talk to shoe manufacturing people, right, to like really get to the bottom of that. But I think that probably does lend itself towards it. It's not just a single like molecule or single like formula that's like going to work in the best foam, right? It's probably more complicated.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it seemed like historically you could fairly reliably be with any of the major brands and probably find a shoe that, as long as it worked with you reasonably well, it wasn't going to be like outcompeted by a large margin from one brand to the next. But now, like, that's not necessarily the case. And it's not always necessarily the case at the individual level either, where you get someone who just responds really well to a specific shoe. Then someone's like, well, like, I guess maybe the way to look at this is like, say Kipchoge goes and, runs his sub 2 hour project thing, and everyone's like, well, that's the shoe I need to wear. But everyone who sees that, they probably are right that getting in a super shoe is going to improve their performance to some degree, but it may not be that exact shoe. It may be one of the other brands' models that they respond better to.
Yeah. That's a tough topic. This idea of like individual responsiveness and like high responders, low responders. I think some folks said when we did that first study, like comparing 7 different brands models like, oh, it's all going to be individual, right? Like everyone's gonna have an individual response. And like, it wasn't the case in that, like at that time, right? There were some shoes that were like top tier, mid tier, low tier. And that was pretty consistent response across people. That's where we were able to like make conclusions of like differences. I think as other brands have caught up using some of the same materials, like you talk about, those differences probably have like diminished, but there's not really like good published data on examining like differences in magnitude of responsiveness across individuals. Like, I've got a lot of case study data, and I've got like, we do testing at my lab. Like we need to get you in the lab with all the shoes that you're testing now. And like, we can test you in 4 or 5 shoes in a single day. Like, and look at those numbers for you. And there's one study that came out that was like plus or minus 11% benefit in like these different shoes. It was an Adidas backed study, and they showed even within their like Adidas super shoe prototypes and like elite Kenyans, there was some shoes in that lineup that some of the guys were getting like 11% running economy benefit and others at 11% decrement.
Oh wow.
Which is like 22% swing, which is just insane. Like that's equipment noise. It's not, that's not the level of individual responsiveness we're seeing. Like, so no one's getting a 10% benefit in a super shoe compared to like a traditional shoe or another super shoe. Like for sake of example, like in those magnitudes, like if I, test myself in the Alpha Fly, which is like the best shoe I ever test in, usually like 4 or 5% compared to like my standard control shoe, to a Croc, like your gardening clog, right? That's like 8% difference for me. So like to have a 20% swing is like, that's equipment noise. So some stuff got like overblown with like hyper responders in super shoes. Like, we've gone back, we've got like a reliability study that's about to get published that looked at like how consistent your metabolic card is, like that's making these readings, like how we're making these interpretations, like how consistent it is. And like, I feel confident, like in our lab with our equipment, like any difference is greater than 1%, like on a given day, between 2 shoes for you, like we can make conclusions on that. But we went and analyzed like our old group data, for them at our original study. And you just look like the amount of noise, in that like repeatability, there's probably like most of the shoes we look at, you can't really say like, oh, that's a high responder, that's a low responder. Like if we did the study again, that person might be like here today and here the next time. And like, so all that to say, there's like, I don't feel like we have good data out there to say like who is a high responder and a low responder. I feel good if I take you into the lab individually, like we can make conclusions on a given day in that shoe lineup to give you good recommendations. And I can tell you what's probably a wash. But to be like, some people are getting a 5% benefit in this shoe and others a 2, and I think it's harder to make those comparisons so far. But.
That's interesting. My assumption was that it was much larger than that, but it sounds like that's a lot of.
I don't think the differences are nearly as big as people have made. Like, I mean, like when Chep Nagetic ran sub 210 and people were like, oh, is it because she switched shoes and getting a 5% benefit now? Like, I don't think she went from she was in the Vaporfly and then went to the Alpha 3 or something. I don't think there was another like phase change of 5-6% on top of that.
Some of it's got to be her just getting faster.
I mean, people can discuss all the potentials for that.
Well, and that's the big kind of worry about it seems, is that there, like whatever variability there is, if there were like hyper responders and non-responders and things like that, then you have this situation where you add another variable to sport essentially that's going to select, especially when you get to the top tier where, a percentage could be the difference between being first or fifth at a big race. And now all of a sudden the shoe could actually cover that sort of a difference.
I mean, I'm definitely a proponent for individualized footwear testing. Like, I think it's an easy enough thing to measure in the lab. So basically, like for people who aren't familiar, to assess your running economy, it's sub-maximal. It has to be below threshold. So like usually we go marathon pace or a little slower. And 5 minutes on, 5 minutes off, alternating between shoes. So we can get to like a steady state oxygen consumption in that 5-minute window. And we usually like to test every shoe in duplicate. So like if you came into the lab with 4 shoes, we do 8 reps by 5 minutes on, 5 minutes off, and measure your oxygen consumption at, let's say, around marathon pace. And then we could compare the oxygen consumption or energy expenditure like between those different shoes, like average across 2 trials. And so the testing itself is not, it's not that complicated. It's single day, sub-maximal. It's not like you have to come to the lab, get your finger pricked a bunch for like lactate testing or like do all out max effort. And it's a single day in the lab. So like, I mean, we do it in my lab for 60 to $80. And so yeah, if you're a competitive athlete, elite athlete, like it's an easy thing that's on the table. No, the harder thing is like have the shoes in the lineup to come in. So like sometimes people like buy a couple shoes, come test them in the lab, wipe them off, and return the one that didn't test good for them. Right? Like okay, I mean, so yeah, I think that's if you're like highly competitive athlete, that's a maybe low hanging fruit, not that hard of a thing to do. You just need a university lab with a good metabolic cart. Well, it doesn't have to be university lab, but most likely place you find it. Now, there's different metabolic carts out there that are noisier than others. So when I say like I feel confident with like if I test you in the lab and we have more than 1% difference between two pairs of shoes, like I'd be confident in the conclusions I give you. And that's not going to be the case on every metabolic cart. Some like you might need bigger than 2% difference to like be confident about that.
Oh, okay, so, interesting.
So that's why like we had that like repeatability study to like kind of establish what your equipment noise is.
What level of consideration is there to fatigue coming in or throughout? Because like one thing I always think about is like whatever you test most efficient in the lab, assuming you're relatively fresh. Is there a reason to doubt that is sustainable over the course of like a marathon, or is there? I guess maybe what I would be interested in would be: is there any reason for someone to go into your lab, test fresh, and then go in again and test fatigue to kind of see if there's a difference between, say, the beginning of the marathon and the end of the marathon?
Yeah. So I think there's some speculation, and I've even seen a little bit of like preliminary data that might suggest late in the marathon, tired legs, that the benefit is slightly greater. Like of a super shoe versus say a control shoe. Would there be some like interaction or crossover to where like this was your best shoe fresh and all of a sudden it's a totally different shoe?
Yeah.
Like when you're tired, I would think more so like better judge of that would be like, hey, if we test you fresh, this is your best shoe, but you don't feel like after you go run 2 hours in that shoe that like you can do that, right? Like that you can't take that shoe that distance, and that's probably more of a sign, right? Like, but assuming you can run that distance in the shoe you test fresh in, most economical, then I doubt we're going to see like a big swing in like what's the best shoe later. But in terms of like, is the benefit greater on tired legs? I think there's a little bit of anecdotal evidence for. And we were talking about Jeff Burns. He's done a little trial stuff on like that on himself, but I don't think came to much conclusive. But I've seen a little bit of preliminary like conference abstract type data that has indicated maybe like your running economy gets worse the longer you run, right? If we measured your running economy fresh versus tired, your energy consumption is going to go up as you get more tired, and so that drift up might be a little bit reduced. With the super shoes. But I don't see that as need to like maybe have to test you on tired legs as opposed to fresh legs, because I don't get the sense that the shoe that's best is going to totally flip, right?
Yeah. Just a quick reminder, Maui Nui venison is one of my favorite protein sources. The reason: they have balanced an invasive species, the axis deer, that is devastating to the Maui habitat if not kept in check, all while providing some of the most nutrient-dense meat source you will find. Check out my full description of how I use Maui Nui venison at the end of the episode. Yeah, I wonder because like I'm not doing marathons either, I'm doing 100-mile races, so my other thought is always just like let's say I got like 3 shoes that all tested within 1% of each other. From there, is it just like, okay, well, this one feels way more comfortable on my foot. Yeah. Am I probably going to want to lean towards that one, just given that I'll be on them for 11, 12 hours?
Yeah, I think that's fair then. Like if everything's a wash in the lab, then I'd say, pick what you like more, or whichever one's got cooler colors or whatever, right? And even when we test in the lab, I think you're talking about ultra stuff, but like, folks still have kind of this notion that like, oh, if I'm gonna run a 5K or a mile, I need like a more minimal shoe, right? And like, I want this high stack Alphafly type shoe for a marathon, but not for a 5K maybe. Like, I got to do something lighter, right?
Yeah.
And in my mind, like, you should race in your most economical shoe that you were comfortable in for that distance. So if you come into the lab and like this big honking shoe is your most economical, my mind doesn't say just run that in the marathon. I say run that in all your distances. Like,
Yeah.
Now, if you come into the lab and your most economical shoe is like some really lightweight, tiny, flimsy thing, right? And you're like, okay, I can run a mile in that, but I don't feel comfortable running a marathon in that. Then I say, well, pick something different, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, yeah, if you test most economical on a big shoe, then ride that thing.
Yeah. That's another interesting thing that I think about from time to time, because before super shoes came out, when I first got into ultra running, my thought was, well, from a performance standpoint, racing flats are going to be quicker than a nice cushioned shoe, assuming you can tolerate it. So I spent years building up my foot strength to where I did some 100 milers in like a 3.9 ounce shoe.
Yeah, yeah.
And when I ran my fastest 100 miler, it wasn't that small of a shoe, but it was basically a racing flat.
Yeah.
So, and I didn't have any I negative split the race and I was running my fastest miles at the end. So it's hard for me to argue that what if I that was a limiter at the time, given that I wasn't running in super shoe foam. So I wonder if there would be, with what you said, if you can tolerate the firmer shoe, do you still lean towards something, or would you have a smaller benefit from a super shoe then?
So you're asking if you were already accustomed to this minimalist shoe, would you be a lower responder potentially to the super shoe? Yeah, I think that goes back to that responder, non-responder thing. It's still unknown. In our initial super shoe comparison study, I tried to look at some of that, of who got the biggest response and least response, and the folks who were most economical to begin with had a smaller response to the super shoe, but that's also just statistics, because if you were more economical already, then a shoe that gives you some benefit, you're naturally dividing it by, it's it's already baked into the percentage benefit. Whereas if you were really bad economy, then the super shoe is going to have a larger difference. So it might just be a statistical fluke and not necessarily a responder thing. So
sure.
I could see an argument though that if someone's already really economical, that how economical can you become, right? To putting a new shoe on your foot, but I just don't know that we have data to say that confidently. I think it's been interesting in terms of when you look at the marathon and athletes who have scaled up to the marathon really rapidly, from the track. I think Asefa was 800-meter runner in the past. I think when you look at what Olympic champ, female, Netherlands, why is her name escaping?
Oh, Hassan.
Yeah, look at what Hassan has done. You wouldn't traditionally think middle distance runners running economy being the most important performance determinant for them, right? They could probably get by with less great running economy. It's not in the performance model is the most important thing.
Yeah.
Whereas marathon running, you think running economy one of the most important things. I sort of wonder this train of thought of is it allowing people who with poor economy to scale up to those longer distances better? I like that kind of theory, but it's a hard thing to test out probably.
Yeah.
So to, I guess your question of would you, because you were already training in the more minimalist shoe, maybe had better economy, get less benefit? We don't know, I guess, unless we test you.
Yeah, we'll have to find out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was funny because I was thinking to myself, I was I spent all those years trying to create an advantage by being able to tolerate a shoe like that for a 100-mile race, because no one else was really doing. I shouldn't say that. There were other ultra runners doing minimalist stuff.
Yeah.
But there weren't other ultra runners doing kind of the flat controllable stuff the way I was. Yeah. So in my mind, I was chasing records, so I wasn't racing people necessarily. It was more okay, so-and-so ran 11:28. I want to try to break that, or I ran, 11:40. I want to try to get under that. And it was just seeing where can I kind of pull an advantage through that adaptation. But
when I think there's probably still a place for that adaptation and that as an aspect of training, right? Mm-hmm. You don't have to be all minimal or all maximal, right? The idea of you probably shouldn't be running super shoes every day. You probably shouldn't be barefoot for life, right?
Yeah.
But there's probably still benefits to be had from jogging some minimal or walking around barefoot or doing some strides barefoot, right? I think we tend to make things these opposite ends of the continuum, as opposed to be this is a tool, right? This is a stimulus. So yeah, I think probably being in minimal footwear, walking around barefoot, probably some foot strength, like calf, Achilles stiffness kind of stuff that might benefit from that. Is it fully additive to like the benefit of the shoe? I don't, maybe not, but I could see a place for all of those things, right?
Right. That was going to be, I've got this kind of conflicting two theories in my head that are maybe unanswerable, but I'll run them by you anyway. And one was just like, if you build up like a ton of foot strength by running in a shoe like that, like a minimalist shoe or a firm shoe, and then you get into like a super shoe, in my mind, I think, okay, you got strong lower legs, and now on top of it, you're putting this tool on there that's going to preserve that area better. But if I would say then just switch over to just training only in super shoes from there, I wonder if someone would have like a better response to super shoe early on, and then over years, would that maybe diminish if they're not taking care of maintaining that foot strength they developed? My conflicting theory of that is, but they also may get more efficient in the super shoe by wearing it more often, and then therefore get better by having it not have that diminishing return potential.
Yeah. So like, what happens to your foot strength? And so that's not so much my research line, but like,
this is Jeff Burns'
from
question.
from what I'm familiar with like the folks who do more of that, like, I think yes, we could make your calves and your feet weaker if we put you in a maximal shoe all the time when you used to be minimal. Like, that would probably happen. And so that's why I would think still having some of that minimal stimulus is just good for all around, injury prevention. The question of, do you need to train in the shoe to be like more economical in that shoe? I'm not so confident you need to do that. I've got a colleague who tried to tackle that in a master's thesis, which is a big take on to do a training study. Most of these studies in super shoes are acute. Like you come into the lab once in a single day. And so he had people in a super shoe, in a control shoe, test in the lab, go out, half of the group, have the people trained in the super shoe, half the people trained in the control shoe, they came back. And so he was trying to track like, if you trained in the super shoe, was that better or worse? And for the most part, it was hard to make any like real conclusions from that work. But those are doing training studies like it. They're hard to do. You get people that drop out, people who don't come back, that take your shoes. I get to keep all my shoes in lab testing because you only come in and test them once. But if you're doing a study like that, you got to send people off with shoes. That's like tough studies to do. But yeah, no, I don't. I've done so much case study testing that I always go back to the fact that like Nike Alphafly, first time out of the box, 4%, and I've never gotten like much bigger than that. Or like I pretty much every day I've ever tested those, it's 3 to 5%. And so I think there might be a little bit of learning curve. Like when you look at the biomechanics data, like people's biomechanics kind of settle out within like the first 3 minutes or so of wearing a shoe. So like our little 5-minute trials that we do, even if you're wearing that shoe the first time, like you kind of settle into your mechanics like pretty quickly. So I don't know so much someone needs to go around in it for months to like really get the benefit they're going to get out of it. I think your mechanics adjust pretty quick.
Yeah, you might just want to like use it in some of the training sessions that are specific to whatever race you're doing.
I like going back to principles. Like we don't have to all become dumb because we have like new shoes, right? Like back in the day, we would lace up our flats for like hard workouts, like key sessions, right? And then maybe there's some days we just did some tempos in our trainers, right? Or did some hill reps in our trainers that was just kind of like more low key, right?
Yeah.
And so like that same kind of mindset of like, hey, specificity is a good principle to follow. Like if this is really key race pace kind of session, I want to mimic what I'm going to do in a race. Like, put the shoe on that you're going to race in, right? So it's like, I think for key workouts that makes sense. Even like in a marathon training plan, like for your long runs with stuff in them, right? Like where you're throwing in some marathon pace stuff, like it makes sense to me. Maybe not on every single long run, but on the ones where you're doing harder work in them, I think that's good because you also want to know that you can wear that shoe for that long, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. No, and that's how I usually go about it because I'll get to the end of my training plan and I follow kind of I think all the training inputs are important even when you're running 100 miles. So I'll be doing like short intervals, long intervals and stuff like that, targeting VO2 max threshold stuff. But then when I get to the end of the plan, when I'm getting like, 8 weeks out from the race itself, I'll start skewing a lot of that training load to like longer runs at kind of race intensity. So by then I'm starting to really get pretty particular about what product I'm using during those sessions because I want to be really comfortable and know that that's the product that's going to, get me to the finish line ultimately too. Yeah. And I think at that point, you're probably gonna be just fine in that shoe if it made it through all those long runs.
Yeah, I think that's a good philosophy.
Have you tried out the Mizuno Wave Rebellion Pro 3?
I've tried them on, but I haven't tested them. So my story from earlier, like I was at Stephen F. Austin State University out in Nacogdoches.
Yeah.
Up until I've been here in Austin at St. Edward's University for 2.5 years now. So when we first did that super shoe comparison study, that was at SFA, and that was so popular at the time. Like I was getting shoes like almost weekly to like test return kind of thing, and like had built up pretty big like social media following from that.
Yeah.
But like since moving to Austin, like I'm starting a lab from scratch here, which is up and running now. Like I've got a good lab here now. Can be as productive as ever. We've got great running community here to like bring in participants and do testing and but like the case studies testing that was done kind of fell off. So like a lot of stuff in the last year or two, like I just haven't been like buying stuff and testing stuff as much. I have tried those on though. They look pretty. I saw you were testing those out.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah. They were probably the quickest brand to respond when I reached out and was like, hey, I'm going to be doing some shoe testing. Is there anything I should be aware of? And they're like, you should try these.
Okay. So you are getting some brands to give you product now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, so what's your take on if you go do like objective, right? So there's a lot of shoe review stuff, right?
Yeah.
It's like just subjective. We can all boil down like, oh, it's just his opinion. Someone else might like it, right? Like, what's your take on if you get a bunch of stuff like this in the lab, go do objective testing and share it?
Yeah.
Do you think they're going to care about that?
They haven't, at least the brands I've been able to get contact with, they haven't seemed to care. They seem optimistic about just, oh yeah, we'll check it out, see what you have. I haven't done any thorough reviews yet, so I could piss some people off, I guess. And then they're like, we're not giving you shoes anymore. But, I think there's workarounds for that too. You could partner with like a running store or something like that. And you could just buy the shoes as well if you wanted to go that route.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's the way I look at it is like if all the brands are going to send me their kind of like flagship offering and they're all kind of doing it, it's like, it's not like I'm getting better representation from one than the other. They're all giving me a pair of shoes to test out and create content with. And then it's like, I'm going to find the one that works best for me, but that may not be, kind of like we were talking before, that might not necessarily be the best for the next person. So I think as long as I'm kind of making sure that that's pretty clear, then I don't know that there's a huge problem with it, but someone will have a problem with it, I'm sure.
Yeah, I know. I've kind of sat in a weird space when it comes to like the shoe testing. I never wanted to be like a shoe reviewer or YouTuber type of person, right? Like my main position on this is academic, right? Like I publish papers related to running performance, but like I've had fun doing case study testing like on myself and sharing some of that on socials and stuff, right? But at the same time, like never really wanted that to grow into like that's my main avenue, right? My main thing. So like I've kind of sat in this weird place of like not reaching out to like because there's for like what you're doing now, right? There's like the marketing brand people, right?
Yeah.
That are like kind of with the shoe reviewer influencer kind of folks, right? And then like if you want to do the research though, then it's more of like the product line development folks. And so I've kind of sat in like a weird spot independent of both.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I have a review partner too. Do you know Brady Holmer by any chance?
I know of Brady.
Okay,
probably been on some long runs Brady was on.
Yeah.
With the Purple Dragon crew, but Brady and I were talking. I read Brady's content on Twitter.
Sure. Yeah. So he's gonna review shoes with me too. So my hope is that like we'll probably have different he's training for different stuff too, but I bet we'll have different preferences. So my hope is that like that will show too, where like he'll be thinking about some things that he likes or doesn't like, and maybe I'll have a different experience. So we have some of that kind of variance there too. So it's not just like me saying what I like or honestly, the way I want to kind of do it is like I think like most running shoes have a purpose. It's about figuring out what that purpose is and then like who it's likely to work better for. And when people listen to that stuff, like if I were listening to someone going over products, I'd want to just kind of have a similar experience as to if I went to a specialty shop and they were like, oh yeah, what's your foot like? Okay, well you'd probably be better off in one of these 4 shoes out of the hundreds that they have there. So then they're helping you narrow that down to like 3 or 4 pairs. Then you try them on and see what works. So my hope is like these people who are buying online or who are just shopping in general, they can say like, okay, well, I have no clue what I want. Now I've got it narrowed down to a few pairs, and then it's sort of on me to kind of put them on and see which one feels best.
Yeah.
That's where I would like it to go anyway. So we'll see how well of a job I do at that. But
yeah, and I've always thought too with like the shoe reviewing too, if like you find somebody who kind of like, oh, they really like this shoe really worked well for me, and they like this one too. So I bet that like if you kind of can find that in people, like so if you get a little bit of diversity in opinion, so people kind of have that to pull from. That's what one of the goals. Like all the case study testing I was doing originally was just pretty much on me. One of my goals when I came to Austin, got my lab set up, was to have like a small batch of people who like consistently came in. Like, so we did that a bit when we got the $500 Adidas shoe. Yeah. And it had me and 2 other folks that we tested. Now we didn't all have the same full lineup because like they were some different other shoes they wanted to test, like that they would consider racing in. But we all had like at least that Adidas shoe like in the lineup, you know? And so like it's kind of some small batch case study testing like that to add to your kind of like subjective experience, like to have those objective numbers. And then you can say, okay, well this shoe was worse for everybody, or this one was better for him, not him. And they kind of get at some of those comparisons we were talking about earlier. Yeah. So I totally invite you and Brady into the lab whenever you
we want to come in
stuff. So
we'd appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah. That'd be fun content.
Yeah. I mean, it is an interesting world with the different products out there, but the different foams and stuff. But yeah, the Mizuno Wave Rebellion was an interesting one to me because it seemed like they were trying to like skirt the rules with that shoe a little bit. Where I think if I remember the specs right, that bulb of foam is the best way I can describe it, is like 61 millimeters, which is like well past regulation, because regulation is like 40 millimeters.
Yeah. Okay.
But since the measurement point, I mean, this is something that I find odd. Like World Athletics decided a specific point on the shoe that you measure for that 40 millimeter cross point, and it's like, I guess it's far enough back where they could just lop off the back of that.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, I noticed that too. Yeah, you know, and it seems kind of, some of the regulations are arbitrary. I feel like when the regulations first came out, it was like, oh, this perfectly allows the original Alpha Fly to like be within the regulations, and like everyone innovate around those guidelines. So, but yeah, so some of it seems a bit arbitrary when you think about it. But you know, the idea of like, is more foam better? There's a paper or two out like at that. Like there's some folks in my field who are like, we don't need regulations at all, and some would say, oh, we need regulations. Right? Yeah. We should limit the like. That was one of Jeff's arguments. Like original opinion piece he wrote on this topic was like limit the area for like future innovation. Like, so regardless of whether or not like more foam is absolutely better, it's just like who knows what's going to be invented next or come up with next. So like limit the area that everyone's like working from similar. Yeah. And so I could see an argument for that. And then the folks who are like, oh, don't limit innovation at all, like stack height is self-limiting. Like if you make an 8 millimeter shoe, like it's going to be too wobbly. So so there is a paper I've seen. I don't know if it's published yet, or I just saw the preprint of it, but it was from the Hokamer group, who's the original Vaporfly 4% guy, that more foam potentially like more economical, like beyond the 40. But if you like consider the extra mass that comes with that, it might be a wash. And so that was in that study. It was like, with the extra mass, if it's not, the shoes aren't mass matched, which in the real world, your shoe's not going to be mass matched if you got an extra 20 millimeters of foam on the sole of it, right? Then it was kind of a wash. And then on top of that, you like sacrifice some like lateral stability and stuff. So, so I can see both arguments, honestly. Like, so do you really need to skirt the guidelines by making 60 at one point? Like, is that even useful? Like, I'm not sure, you know? I think some of those recent papers I saw would suggest, no, it doesn't matter. But I think some of those have the intention of like removing that regulation too. Like there's like some footwear manufacturer like wishes to remove those regulations, just not have any. But I tested. I have the Prime X. The Adidas is like, everyone getting around the illegal shoes, right? Like that one is like by all rules not within the limits, right? It's like over 40 millimeters at the point of measurement. And I didn't test better in that than like in the Adidas Pro 2 or better than like the Alpha Fly. So it's like, but that's, you know, it's still kind of apples to oranges to comparison. If you're comparing different models of shoes, right? You really need like that exact same shoe in 40 versus 60. Like, is there a difference, right? And only like the prototypes can really do that. Sure.
Yeah. They're getting into creativity at its finest at that point. Wasn't the shoe that Kipchoge wore for the Sub 2 project, technically a legal shoe, but they hadn't put the regulations in place yet. It was like 52 millimeters and 2 plates or something like that. There's so much stories about it now. I don't know what's real and what's not.
Yeah, I think that's That's the main one. As far as I know, he ran in like what we know of the Alpha Fly, original Alpha Fly. But I saw anecdote and stories and postulates and like old sketches and stuff of like, so yeah, I guess we'll never know unless we cut that shoe open. But I've kind of accepted in my head that it was like what we know.
Okay.
But yeah, it's interesting, the 2-plate thing. I don't know if anyone's got published research on it. Isn't the newest, the Prime X2, does it have 2 plates? Adidas's new illegal one has 2 plates. I don't think the one that I have does. I think it's just the higher stack.
Yeah, I don't know for sure if that one's. I just know that you're not legally not allowed to have more than 1 plate at this point.
Well, in the whole conversation about so it's like 40 millimeter stack, 1 plate in a single plane is kind of the main thing, right? But for most of us, I mean, if you're competing like professionally or under World Athletics rules, elite athlete, that matters. But for most of us, it doesn't.
Right.
So
you just want to go get that Boston
qualifier. someone going to Boston qualifier, or even someone run 225 at Boston. Like they're not in the pro field doing that. They can go wherever shoe they want. So.
Yeah. So you get that, I guess, too. So yeah. It's interesting when you think of just like the different designs you could come up with and how you would work within the rules. I kind of like the idea of having some parameters and say, okay, everyone build within this, especially since apparently these brands have enough money to still build shoes outside of those rules if they want to play around with that sort of stuff. But it would be interesting to see, because it's like you said, there's a margin of diminishing return somewhere with any of that. So do you limit actually figuring that out by limiting the types of products? Because obviously if they had no regulations, someone would be making a 60 millimeter shoe, and then someone like you would be out there testing it and seeing if it was better or worse or the same.
I find myself more and more now on the like less regulation in the thing, just because it seems like it's already like
cat's out of the bag.
Cat's out of the bag, exactly. To where I think like people ask me like, what's going to be the next big thing, right? And I'm like, I'm not on the R&D side. Like I can't tell you what's the next big thing, but I do feel like the big step change, the big phase change has already happened. Like I'm sure they'll keep getting slightly marginally better, but like I think the big change has already happened. So where I don't see us getting another 4% boost.
Right.
Like if you just start running some of the math on that too, of like what would that mean for performance?
Right.
Like it's kind of the same idea when we say like this 11% benefit. I'm like, look at what that does to performance time. Like those are just crazy numbers. So yeah, I think some of it's got to be self-limiting as long as you got like a motor in the shoe,
Yeah. Just a quick reminder that Element Electrolytes is my go-to electrolyte source. They are offering a free sample pack with purchase for all HPO listeners at drinklmnt.com/HPO. Check out my full description of how I use Element at the end of the episode. Yeah, the other thing I want to ask you about was just the pacing stuff, because it seems like with a lot of these products, the faster you're going, the better the product is going to perform relative to the control. Because I was thinking about that. I was like, well, there's obviously these guys running the 4-minute pace in the marathon. And then, for me, like if I go do 100 mile on a pair of super shoes, maybe in the mid 6s if things go really, really well. So like, is there a consideration for me there versus someone training, like one of these elite marathoners training for a low 2-hour race finish?
I think less for you and more for all the other people running ultra marathons that aren't running.
Right, when they start getting into the 10-minute mile pace.
This is the second study that we published. Was like I said, kind of like my interests are always kind of driven by like my own running questions, but also like the consumer driven questions, right? So like, is there a difference across brands and models? Like we did that paper, right? And then the follow up to that is the benefit of these super shoes like similar for a 3-hour marathoner and a 4-hour marathoner? Because most of the research that had been done in the first few years of like the super shoe research was all at like 7-minute pace and faster. A lot of it 6-minute pace and faster. So like people running marathons 3:30 plus, like how much benefit was the shoe? So that's we did that study, was looking at just the Vaporfly That's kind of the most commonly studied shoe. We looked at that at 8-minute mile pace and like 9:30 pace. I think corresponding to like 3.5 to like 4:15 marathoners. And whereas like in some of the previous studies, like in our lab, we show like around 3% in the Vaporfly, like depending on what study you look at, like maybe they call it the 4%, right? But like it's across the research literature, maybe 2.7 to 4%. But when we did at those much slower paces, like it was more like 1%, 1.5%. So I think there is, at least for, that shoe, and I think probably carry over to some others, like compared to standard control shoe, like maybe reduced benefit at slower speeds. Now, could a company like make a shoe that would be better at the slower speeds versus the faster? Like, I think they probably could, right? Most probably were trying to innovate for the fastest. Yeah. I think some brands would tell you now, like they probably try to think about the slower end, the bigger end of their market too.
Right.
So I think what's funny though is in that Jeff was co-author on that paper with me, and one of the reviewers had, like, we had listed potential implications for that study, right? Like at the slower paces, reduced benefit. And we had left off a part about like ultra running or trail running. Yeah. And one of the reviewers like called us out and said, I'm surprised based on the authors that Joe didn't mention this, like knowing I don't run ultras or trail, but referencing Jeff. And my comment back to the reviewer was like, Jeff was too fast to make those considerations, and I'm too smart to run those distances. So I think, if you're running ultras at 6:30 pace still, probably you're in the ballpark of all the things that we've tested already. But, sure. But yeah, I think my main takeaway from that study was like, if you're running a 4-hour marathon, you shouldn't have as big of like this blanket assumption that you're going to get a 4% benefit from this shoe. It's like you absolutely have to be in this shoe, right? Like if you don't like it, then don't just assume like you're getting that benefit. And there was more people the interesting thing in like a lot of the super shoe research is like a good shoe, pretty much by and large, compared to like a control shoe, a traditional shoe, and these studies at faster paces, like everyone gets some benefit. Like, so when we say like a non-responder or someone who has a negative response, like running worse economically in that shoe, like very few, if any of that, across like several super shoe studies at faster speeds. And the slower studies that we've done, a larger percentage of like the opposite responders, right? Like not only a smaller like group mean benefit, but like some people who are doing worse in that shoe, right? So I think that's kind of my takeaway is like if you're running at truly slower paces, all relative, right? But if you're running at those kind of paces, don't just have a blanket assumption that shoe's going to be beneficial. Like comfort matters. I think the most comfortable shoe is not always your most economical shoe, but I'm willing to bet that an uncomfortable shoe is not economical. Yeah. So it's like, just because like on average in these fast studies, a shoe had a 3-4% benefit, well, you're running at much slower paces and you don't really feel like it's that comfortable, then like, that's not assume anything about that shoe for you. Right. So yeah, I think, across the range of speeds that we kind of looked at in that ballpark, that's kind of my take.
That's kind of what I was thinking about with the wave rebellion. Because I was like, what if I'm like just ripping in that shoe when I'm out training and it's like head and shoulders above everything else I test, just theoretically. But that shoe, the way it's constructed, is likely not going to feel great for 12 hours or 11 hours. Maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I've worn it a couple times, so I know how it feels in a workout, but I don't know. I haven't taken on a long run yet to see if it kind of loses its desirability as you get longer in it. But
yeah, I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, like in terms of specificity and like taking the shoe the distance you need to take it, or at least like
so you got to run 100 miles to figure it out.
Or at least like, I mean, you're not doing that in training runs, right? But like how you would have made assessments about other shoes in the past, like yeah,
I think I'd probably get enough cumulative fatigue with some back-to-back long runs. If I wore that shoe for the entirety of it, I could probably figure out if it was something that I was going to hate. Well, I could also change out of it too. Like that's not the end of the world if you maybe I go through 100K and then switch into something different.
Yeah. What's the ultra where it starts trail and then it goes to the roads?
JFK?
JFK. Yeah. I saw, what did I say? It was a former triathlete dude. Is it Hemming, Eli?
Oh, yeah.
Who's doing an ultra now. And his like shoe changed on that. Well, because that's what he was wearing, a trail shoe, and then switched to like a road shoe. Yeah. And everyone was like so impressed by his, I did triathlon, in my grad school days, that everyone's so impressed by his shoe change. I was like, come on, man, that's standard practice like there.
Yeah, he had no problem with that. He didn't even have to warm up probably with it. The ultra runners had to take out their chair, unfold it, sit down, take 5 minutes to get the shoes. Yeah, that is an interesting course though, because you probably don't want a super shoe over the Appalachian Trail. Although there's some guys have done that.
I think Jeff did. I think
Did
Jeff
he?
said he made that mistake. I think
Oh,
he said he
okay.
thought he
Yeah.
could do the
You
Vaporfly
get
like through
through
there.
it,
Yeah,
save himself a
I
minute.
have to check for him, but yeah, I think he decided it was a mistake though. After he did
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, I mean, being on that course a few times, I wouldn't want to wear that over the Appalachian Trail. I'm not the best. I mean, I'm sure there's guys and gals who could probably do it and maybe not lose, but I think if you got like a good set of laces or just a crew that had it all set up and ready for you, if you're in and out of that shoe in 30 seconds,
Yeah.
you're going to be better off getting something that's going to be
yeah.
a little more specific.
Yeah, if you got speed laces on there, not even that.
Yep. Yeah.
So on this topic, we're doing a trail study
I was
right
just
now.
going to ask you that. Yeah.
We should get you out there for it.
Yeah.
Let's just see if we have your size in our lineup. I got a wide range of sizes. So we, you know, in terms of like questions of asked, we did the slower speed pace. We did a spike study to see like what the benefit of this tech in spikes was, and then you started seeing this tech in trail shoes now, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, how beneficial is it on the trails? You're running at slower paces, different terrain. So we're comparing right now just like a control trail shoe to the to Nike's Ultrafly.
Okay.
You might have opinions on better super trail shoe, but we just needed a starting point,
Sure.
right? Like just it's got the foam, it's got
Zoom
a plate.
X in there. Yeah.
So not so much to identify like the best trail shoe, just to like quantify the magnitude of the benefit in a trail shoe. So we're doing St. Ed's actually manages like wildlife preserve here in Austin, Wild Basin, and so there's trails out there, and we got a grant out there to like purchase the shoes and do the trail study. So we got like a portable metabolic analyzer.
Right on. Yeah.
And so we're having people run like self-selected like 50K race pace on the trails for multiple reps, like alternating shoes, and then we bring them back in the lab on like the hard stiff treadmill and test them at the same paces. And are looking at like percent benefit from the shoes. So we've got like 8 people done. We're probably shooting more for like 16 on that study. So anyone in the Austin area who likes running trails,
Yeah, I'll come out there.
Check us out.
Knock some miles out in there and get you some data.
And so the interesting thing on that one is like, you know, we kind of try to like keep external validity of like how that shoe's actually used, right? It's like we could go test you in the lab on a stiff treadmill and the Ultrafly at 6-minute mile pace, but if people aren't going to run their races at that, right? Like, so that's kind of like self-selected trail race pace. It's kind of how we did that. So if we go off of what we saw in previous studies that like slower speeds reduce benefit, I would expect maybe smaller magnitude of benefit from the speed alone, whether that's because of like less forces going into the foam or less forces to flex the plate. Like we don't necessarily know that entirely, but then you also got the portion of the trail, just softer terrain, more undulation, turns, that sort of thing. So we'll see if we see a difference between like the stiff treadmill and that, even though the speed is matched. But.
Has anyone done any testing on treadmills on like an incline to see what the efficiency is like when you're up on like a pretty steep pitch?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's one published paper, I think actually just a new one I just saw. But I think it's Whiting, Calista Whiting. They looked at the Vaporfly uphill, downhill, and flat, and slightly reduced benefit uphill. So like if 4% on the flat, maybe like a high 2% on the uphill. And then the downhill is a lot noisier just because like downhill running technique across people varies a lot. And so yeah, but the main takeaway was like still certainly a benefit. And they kind of mimicked the hills of like Boston, I think.
Okay. It's the little baby ones.
All relative, I guess. So slightly reduced benefit. Yeah, and actually, if I can find, I can look this up after and send it to you if I can find it. I want to say I just saw a recent paper that did some treadmill stuff. It might have been steeper because it might have been more like trail focused. So I'll see what that one showed.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know if it's pace related, if it's how you flex that plate, the foam. Like really, there's not a good biomechanical explanation of like how the shoes work in general. Like everyone knows the foam is more compliant and resilient. And so there's more energy return from the foam, but like the amount of energy that if you quantify that doesn't explain like the whole body energy savings. Like it's only a small fraction of that.
Yeah.
So like the biomechanists haven't really like come to some unifying theory on like exactly how the shoes work on you as a human. Like if we did, we could like predict better like which shoe was gonna be best for what mechanics and stuff. And like we're not that far along. There's one paper that showed we know it reduces work at the MTP joint, like the big toe, and the ankle maybe too. And I saw another paper recently that's like EMG muscle activity of the plantar flexors, your calves, is reduced. So like less work on the calves. So I think that's mostly where it's occurring. But yeah, there's not like a big unifying theory on exactly how the mechanics are helping.
Are those forces getting sent anywhere else to any degree? Like if someone starts wearing for the first time, is there any data that would suggest like, oh yeah, give yourself a little bit of time for your quads to adjust to the variance that you're going to get in that shoe versus a normal shoe or anything like that?
Yeah, I don't.
So you hear about the saving, like the lower leg savings, but I always wonder about that, like if there's some sort of like force redistribution that someone would notice.
Well, yeah, because typically, and this is getting more in the biomechanist realm, but typically you think like if you change mechanics, if you like reduce forces at the ankle, you might increase force at the hip or knee or something, right? I don't know that overall like ground reaction forces are different between the conditions. So I don't know if you have a big redistribution. And most of like, if there's a reduction in work, at least it's probably at the ankle, big toe, reduced calf activity and stuff. But yeah,
might be free lunch.
Yeah. Yeah, at least for me personally, when I'm running, there's not less research hat, more just personal feel. Like I feel like when I'm running in them, I'm like, I try to think more of like going to my ankle, like getting the free work from the lower leg as opposed to like driving my hips so hard or something.
Yeah.
Getting that like extra spring from the lower leg.
Yeah. I definitely noticed that. I mean, I guess I've been in some of the premium foams now for about a month. And what I noticed in the Puma Nitro Elite, I think Pro 3, and then the Mizuno Neo Zen. So that's their non-plated one. They've got their premium, I think it's their premium foam in that one. My gait cycle felt like super smooth in it. Just like it felt like, okay, like things are just like, there's no fighting going on here. You're just kind of real fluid through it.
Yeah.
That was pretty like noticeable to me with those two brands. I mean, or models. I've got a lot of other shoes to try yet to see if that replicates across most of that technology, or if it is just those two models happen to be like fitting my gait cycle really well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when you think of like the ride of the shoe.
Yeah.
Like people talk about like kind of the sensation or feel, right? Like I think some of that probably has to do with like the rocker, different rocker shapes, and like, and that's again, it's like less of my research hat and more just like the feel of things, right?
Sure.
I do think there's probably like when I test people in the lab, I'm like, there's shoes that like more people just get along with, and other shoes that are like a little wonkier that less people get along with. Like the original Alpha Fly is a shoe that like on average tested highest in like group means, but that one is the one shoe that I think I'm like a little more confident saying there's higher and lower responders. Like all of the other shoes that we tested in like original lineup, I feel less confident saying like, oh, there's higher and low responders in the Vaporfly or like in the Metaspeed Sky, because just like there was probably more within the normal range of variability you'd expect. Like, but that original Alpha Fly, a lot of people like loved it or didn't like it that much, and like Vaporfly, a lot of people get along with. I think that A6 Metaspeed Sky or that whole lineup. Like just the ride of that, probably a little more universal. So I feel like I do see some things like that pan out a little bit in the data, but also like anecdotal.
Yeah. The other thing I found interesting, this might be a Jeff question, but I'll ask you anyway, is just I had Rory Linkletter on the podcast last year, and he was telling me that he runs for Puma, and he said they had their whole team come out to, I think Boston is their headquarters, and they just tested them in like their Fast R and then their Deviate, and something kind of there was a trend at first, at least, where like some of like the men were getting better efficiency gains from the Fast R, and the women were from the Deviate, and they thought it was because the weight difference between the men and the women were that like that way that Fast R was constructed, if you could put enough force into it, it really worked much better. But if you were a little lighter and were putting less force into it, the plate may have actually somewhat gotten in the way of the actual progress. So they wanted that non-plated, because the deviate original. I mean, maybe there, I can't remember if there's a non-plated deviate, but at the time it was a non-plated shoe. So you saw, like, I think even at the trials, you saw, I think, was it Fiona O'Keefe was wearing the deviate, and then I think even Molly Seidel was wearing that one for a while too. But it seemed to be kind of like that was the distribution, like the heavier male runners.
Well, and that's a whole other element, like not just the amount of foam, but like the stiffness of the plate, like can vary quite a bit. Like say it's a carbon plated shoe, but the amount of longitudinal bending stiffness can vary quite a bit, like how thick that plate is or stiff that plate is. And that's kind of my take on like my further inquiry on like the slower pace stuff, reduced benefit kind of fits into that window. We had men and women in that study, and most of them are pretty lightweight also. And ran at like a pretty high cadence, which would normally translate to like less forces, as opposed to like big loping, slow cadence. And so I didn't have a force measuring treadmill in that study when we did that. But that was one thought, would be like potentially reduce forces. I was just in the Vaporfly, but I've got data that I need to actually finish analyzing. So one of my colleagues over here at UT Austin, Owen Beck, he's a biomechanist. His lab, he's got, motion capture, force measuring treadmill. We brought in a heavy group of runners who were like 180 pound plus guys.
Your hybrid athletes,
and then a lighter group, like under 140 pounds. And we tested them at slow and fast speeds and are trying to like parse out if it's a speed effect or a force effect of like the reduced benefits I saw previously. And actually that study's been on pause for a while, and I just got the ground reaction force data from them for that. So I need to go incorporate that into our metabolic data, the economy data we have, to see if anything like jumps out. But it's interesting you say that about the Puma lab, because that's kind of like same train of thought. That we were kind of going down.
Yeah, it's interesting stuff. It just adds another layer of complexity. It's like the shoe is a huge, maybe not huge, but big enough variable that you got to think of it the same way that you maybe were thinking about fueling in the past, or currently too, I guess. But finding the shoe, the right one, is a good investment.
Yeah. It's not. You got to have the right place to do it, but like if you're in a location like to do it, it's not. I mean, any athlete who's ever paid for a month of coaching or paid for a physiological
or
test,
just buy a pair of shoes at the prices
like,
these things are at.
Then it's not that crazy to think, oh, I'm going to seek out a lab. The tougher thing, I have like an actual folks can email me if they want. I've got like a protocol that if they were like not local and wanted to like go to a lab somewhere, like because a lot of university physiology labs will know how to do like aerobic testing with a metabolic cart, but might not like do running economy testing protocols or footwear protocols. So I've got like a stock document I can share with you if you want it. That's like, here, this is how you conduct the testing. And even so much as like, this is what to ask if you're reaching out to a lab. Now the prices might vary, right? Like if you're looking at,
that's the thing I was curious about too, is because like these labs now, I mean, essentially they're mostly probably just doing your typical metabolic cart testing where someone wants to get their like, their energy ratios of fats and carbohydrates, their crossover points and stuff like that. And dial in their training zones and whatnot. Now it's like there's a whole other service they could offer.
Right.
With shoes.
Yeah, definitely. Anybody who's got a good metabolic cart who can do VO2 max testing or the substrate utilization kind of stuff you're talking about, they could do this. Yeah, for sure.
Is the tech with like stride pods or anything useful for teasing out any of the?
That's a good question. I've talked to those guys recently, actually. And I'm really interested, like that's like $1 million question. If you could like create an app, right? Someone goes running these different shoes, like you're testing, you don't have a metabolic cart, but like you got your stride pods on, and like you take those inputs and then it says, oh, this is your more economical. And I know they're hopeful that like, and I think they've got some ideas and leads on it, but I've seen enough. I have enough data. I mean, like on a shoe like the Alphafly, I've got like probably 50 subjects across multiple studies. And like when I have our like data science guy dig into that, like we can't even make any real conclusive things. Like the person who runs this way is going to get this magnitude of benefit, right? Yeah. Like, and that's a lot of data compared to what most people would have on any particular shoe. And so I'm not confident with like a few isolated people would be like, oh, look, your power was higher here versus here. Like, let's make this conclusion. Like, I think I'm hopeful like we could maybe come to some conclusion like that at some point. But so yeah, I actually they've been really cool. I've got a couple of like the new duo pods that I've been playing around with. And our next project in lab with shoe stuff, I'm going to add that. I've used them before, but they have a few new features on like the latest thing. So, but I think the issue with like trying to like correlate mechanics to economy benefit is you need way bigger data sets. Like when we just want to take like economy comparisons between this shoe and this shoe, the effect sizes are pretty large. Mm-hmm. And so you don't need a ton of subjects in these studies, like 8 to 12 subjects in these studies with these large effect sizes. Like you can make like confident statistical conclusions, but those studies are designed to do that, like to make comparison between shoe A, shoe B, and like repeated measures, like same people testing both shoes. You can get away with a small group for that. But like when you start correlating stuff to those benefits, like you just need more data. You can't have these like small sample size data. The studies have to be like designed for that. So like as we aggregate more and more, like especially if like you have the same control shoe and like comparison shoe, like I think, but whatever relationships we might find like in the Alphafly for that might not be the same relationships you find for the Wavereye or what like whatever other shoe. So I think it's tricky. The few trends I see like in the shoes that the good shoes in the lab, people tend to like mechanically things that change. People tend to have a little bit longer stride length, so it's at a fixed speed, a slower cadence actually, right? Mm-hmm. And with that like longer stride length, like a little more vertical oscillation. Yeah, I see that, but I don't think we're at the point where we can just say like, okay, you went out and ran in 3 shoes and the shoes with the most vertical oscillation were the better shoe. Cause that's like, that could get to misleading at some point. Right. But yeah, so I think hopeful, but I think it's gonna be a while.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see where all that goes. Well, just tech in general is going to accelerate over the years, and then who knows what we'll have available in 5 years that we're not even thinking about now. But
right. Well, and surely we'll have stuff we can measure, but like just because we can measure it, should we do anything with it, right? Like,
I had Steve Magnus on and asked him about that, and he was like, "Yeah, and every time we try to measure something, it just ends up becoming the end all be all, and it just sends us backwards."
Just because we can measure something doesn't mean it means something, right? And it's like it is like the age of wearable tech. That's like a big thing, I think.
Yeah. Just a quick reminder that Delta G Ketones is my go-to exogenous ketone source. You can get 20% off at deltagketones.com with promo code BITTER20. Check out my full description of how I use Delta G Ketones in my training and recovery at the end of the episode. The weight one I thought was interesting too, because I think we do see a lot of variance there across populations in terms of like who's wearing these shoes. Because like when they first came out with these shoes, I wonder if Nike, maybe they've said something about their initial thoughts of what they were going to do with that product, but it seemed like for like maybe a day there was a question of like, is the running world as a whole going to gravitate to these, or are they just going to be like this is sacrilegious, get rid of it? And it was like immediately everyone was in them.
Oh, they're everywhere now. Huh? They're everywhere. I like the accounts that like share funny places people wearing
just wearing them around,
like doing squats or at the Chick-fil-A line or something.
They've hit the casual market too. So mall walkers.
Well, it's like I don't know, like so people too like. When people ask like how much should you be wearing these shoes, I'm like, you know what? Like most of us are not elite athletes, and if you enjoy running in the shoe, then go run in the shoe. Like man, it's fun to run faster. It's fun to like feel that spring and cushion and like so. Yeah. Why not?
It's like a new toy essentially.
Well, and then I mean, like the foam. I think you will. I mean, you're already seeing the foam in way more training shoes, like because which it makes me cringe because it's like now I got to buy $200 training shoes because I'm like, man, I just love these. Like I just enjoy the shoe more, Yes, I think you'll start seeing that foam in more and more places probably.
Yeah. I think you're seeing a lot of brands that have their foam figured out are starting to distribute it into more and more models. Yeah, and that was, you kind of mentioned that before, but I was like, because now you're actually seeing like brands say like, okay, wear this for the 5K, this for the 10K, this for the and that's mostly bogus, I guess.
Well, I mean, I think the shoe company is probably always going to want you to think you need 4 shoes. Right? Like, 'cause you don't have to buy just one then, but.
Yeah, you got 3 performance shoes then. That's all one category, really.
Yeah, from my perspective, from when it comes to like a racing shoe, like I said, like your most economical shoe, if you can wear it for the longest distance, then that's the same shoe. Like for me, the Alphafly is my most economical shoe. I'm gonna run in the marathon. I'm gonna run in a mile. So yeah, I'm not convinced. And I've tested like a Streak Fly or something like that. And it's not better for me. So, not in the lab or by feel. So,
yeah. I mean, when people ask me about getting shoes, I usually tell them like, you'll probably, I mean, if you can make the initial purchase, you'll probably save money if you have like a 3-shoe rotation, but you probably don't want a 5K racer, a half marathon racer, and a marathon racer. You probably want one racer, then like we were talking about before, a lower profile firm shoe that you can use in the gym and you can use to kind of strengthen your feet and things like that. And then maybe just like a workhorse that you're going to be able to get close to 600 miles.
Yeah. I'm not necessarily against having multiple shoes for that. In fact, the one study that when it comes to running shoes and like injury risk that amounts to anything, because like really the running shoe market has not solved injuries in any which direction, right? Not minimalist or maximalist. The one study that like people will cite or reference is a study that looked at injury risk was less in runners who rotated more shoes. And for whatever reason that is, if just the shoes are rebounding in between, or probably more than anything, I think even more of like you're varying how these tissues are being loaded repeatedly, right? Like it's the same reason like getting on the trails every now and then, just varying how those tissues are being repeatedly loaded. So yeah, having a couple different trainers or a racer mixed in there like that makes more sense.
Yeah.
To me, then like I have a really hard time thinking that someone has an ideal shoe for a half marathon that's different than a marathon.
Right.
You hear people talk about that. They're like, "Oh, this shoe's not good enough for me for a half, though." I'm like, how, what? It's like what? How many seconds per mile difference you're talking about here?
Yeah.
Like, and all of a sudden it's only flipped the script. I don't think we're that sensitive.
Yeah. One thing I did want to ask you about with like, because we throw around all these numbers about efficiency, and those are coming off of something. So like, initially, like there was like a control shoe that it seemed like all this research was being based off of. How does that change over the years? Because like, the way I think about it is like in a perfect world, we'd use a control shoe from like a time prior to super shoe. So we can always see the continual growth. But I would imagine as shoe tech improves, the control shoe becomes something that's a little better than the old shoe was. Old control shoes, so you're making
this is definitely one of the challenges of like academic research and like having some consistency across these comparisons is there's really never been a standard control shoe. In some of the first couple studies, they used the Streak, the Nike Streak that was like the marathon champ of the time, right? But at some point, that shoe's not available anymore. I've got a couple really old ones in a lab that a buddy gave me. It was like 500-mile ones just for like to have them. But yeah, like at some point you can't even get that shoe anymore. So like in my lab, 3 years back when we started this, I started using the Asics Hyperspeed, which is the Ryan Hall special. That's the half marathon record that Connor just finally broke.
Right.
That was Ryan Hall's shoe. They like restarted the iterations of it, but that was the Hyperspeed. And I've got this like funny quote from like an old Let's Run article from like however many years ago of like Ryan Hall praising that shoe, saying it's the best shoe ever. And, like it's just, I love it. And it's like so incredible, like what he did in that shoe, right? So I've held on to that shoe as my control shoe. So like I have a standard control shoe in my lab that I refer to, but that's not the case across every lab and never will be, really, just because you can't there's not the one shoe. This is Roger Karam, great researcher, biomechanist at CU Boulder. He's retired now, but his lab is where that 4% study was when Hokamer first did it. He suggested to me a while back, you should start using the Nike, what did he tell me? Cortez, I think.
Okay.
As like your standard control shoe, because it's never changed.
And
so it's like it's like the marathon shoe of the 60s, 70s, whatever. It's never changed, and it's like, but that shoe even is like, it'll be like hard to get at times. Like it'll be like limited release when like it gets bought up for casual wear, and like so yeah. I don't know. There's a perfect solution. I like kind of like internally what we've done is like at least in my lab I've got a standard, and then I like whenever I bring people in for like case study testing. I mean, at the end of the day, you really just want to know like what racing shoe is best for you. So you could just test racing shoes in the lineup. I like having a control shoe in the lineup because it gives me more confidence in our conclusions when I can say, okay, all of these shoes are within 1% of each other, but you were 4% better than the control shoe. Like if everything was within 1% of each other, I'm like, okay, how's our data today? Like,
Yeah.
are you just a non-responder?
Yeah.
So I like having like something that's worse that like we're confident is going to be worse.
Sure.
But it's not necessarily like required. But and then for me, the other reason I do it is like I've tested probably. You can look back at old like Instagram stuff on my Lab Rat Rundown account. Like there's a slide I've got where I tested like a couple dozen shoes over like a year period, and I always had the same control shoe in the Alpha Fly in the lineup. So it's kind of like transitive property comparison. Like you can like rank it relative to what those two shoes were on any given day, and kind of like normalize it to that.
Yeah.
Which is I think actually probably worked pretty good. And so it's been nice having a standard control shoe for that. But yeah, it's not. Across the research lit, that's not the case.
My first thought was like Nike should just bite the bullet and just have a big stash of control shoes that can be distributed to anyone who wants to like, get in on the research. Then I was thinking about that. I was like, I wonder how much of a difference would it matter? Like if somebody, let's say we go back in time and people weren't all wearing the same racing flat, they were going with whatever brand they found most preferable. Would it matter if someone was like, let's say like the Nike Cortez was that control shoe, but then not the person who's testing would have never picked that shoe when it was, they would have picked a different shoe. So does the control shoe need to match the person, I guess? Is what I'm asking?
I mean, so like if I have people come in for case study testing, usually they'll bring in like if they have just like a flat, which those hardly exist anymore.
Yeah.
But, or like a lightweight trainer, like a Timbo shoe that maybe is like, maybe has a foam, but not the plate or something like that. It really, I just think of it as like an internal mechanism to be like, okay, here's something we're confident might be worse to like give us some state of comparison. But I mean, at the end of the day, the real thing is like, how do the race shoes compare to each other?
Yeah.
So I don't know that it's that critical.
Sure.
It's just like a nice kind of point of comparison. But yeah, I think when I have people come in like that, I usually use something that they're familiar with, not some global standard that they might not have ever considered, right?
But even then, I guess it's not like they're racing the marathon in it, so they don't need it to be tolerable to the degree they would if they were doing a race.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, the other benefit of bringing something in that's in your own lineup is like if you're doing some hard stuff, but you're not like putting on your race shoe, this is like the shoe you might mix in there and do instead. Like if you know that, oh, you're 4% better in this race shoe versus that shoe, like you kind of like give yourself some slack when you're doing tempo intervals or something that like, okay, I expect to maybe be a little bit slower in this, right? Might not at the same paces or like make some workout adjustments maybe based on something that you actually have in your lineup. Yeah.
Well, you know what? When I come in and test with you, I actually have the shoe I ran 11:19 in the American record for 100 miles. I mean, it's got 104 miles on it, but it's in good enough shape.
Oh yeah, that's not too much.
I'm going to test
That's
that.
just the one race then.
I want to test that one and see the percentage difference between that one and some of the other shoes.
Yeah.
And then start running math and see how fast I would have been.
Yeah, so that's the math is actually so I thought we were going this direction earlier. So you say like we're measuring this in a lab. You get let's say you get a 4% economy benefit. Does that translate to like a 4% velocity or time improvement? And it's not quite like a 1-for-1 relationship because like as you run faster and faster, like energy cost kind of scales up a little bit non-linearly. Increase like wind resistance is part of that. So some folks have done the modeling for that, and it's I think general rule of thumb is like about a 2/3 benefit. So of the economy benefit in the lab, you get about 2/3 of that in velocity or time improvement. So like if the easy math would be say like a 3% economy benefit would translate to a 2% performance time improvement. So yeah, but we could definitely do that math. Like people in the old Ryan Hall shoe have done the math on his shoe. Like, okay, let's say he was in like a Metaspeed Sky or Alpha Fly. Like
what's he running that half
59 whatever down to like I'm pretty confident 58.30.
Man.
So, but without having the percent value, like
that's an interesting, the different surfaces too, is like how big of a difference is that when you're testing on the treadmill versus on the roads? Because most people are going to be running like a road marathon or something like that.
Yeah. So the one thing that people kind of emphasize in lab testing is to have a stiff treadmill. So if you're on a treadmill that like flexes a lot, then like that's creating its own element of cushioning and compliance that like maybe he's like shadowing what the shoe's doing.
Yeah.
So some folks have made argument like, oh, there are some studies that even show, independent of shoes, that economy is like better on those softer treadmills that like help kind of cushion your landing a bit. There's a point where that would not be the case too. Like imagine running on sand or something.
Right. Yeah.
Like it get too compliant, but and then how they just kind of bounce back weird. Some of them, right? I think like the gym treadmills.
It's like a springboard. Yeah.
So you don't want that on your lab treadmill. Like my original study we did, it was a really firm treadmill deck, but the belt was one of those cushion rubber woodways.
Oh, okay.
So even like the biomechanics purist would be like, oh, that's too compliant, like that woodway deck. Yeah, my treadmill in the lab, I just shim the deck. I shim the frame so the frame can't flex.
Okay.
And then like there's little bumpers that the deck railings sit on, and I've replaced them with like from rubber to like aluminum so that they don't bounce as much or cushion as much. But that's doing a lot. I think if you prevent the frame from flexing, that's a bigger thing. But so most people would say if you got a stiff treadmill, like probably translates to the roads. We actually that's the first study I did here in Austin. Actually was a couple summers ago. That paper, this is what academic research never answers all of our questions really rapidly, right? Because it takes a better part of a year to do a study, and then that paper might be in review for 6 months, and like finally it's published, right? So like that's in the final stages of review right now. But we compared the running economy benefit of a super shoe in the lab on a stiff treadmill to the roads. And so we did like motor pacing with a scooter.
Okay.
At like a cruise control setting on a scooter.
Yeah.
On the roads with a portable metabolic device, and pretty much same benefit, same running economy benefit roads versus treadmill.
That's cool.
So I think if you have a stiff treadmill, results probably translate pretty good to the roads.
Is that portable tech getting pretty good now that you can?
It's getting better, and the price point's getting better, but at the same time, like we talked about with like boom of wearable tech, there's also devices that are coming out that I'm like probably super skeptical of. Like so the kind of gold standard in research has been Cosmed K4. It's like probably $30,000-$40,000. Don't quote me on the price, but tens of thousands of dollars. This device.
Oh, okay.
The little backpack one that you might see some people doing, and that the price point of that's like pretty much exclusive to research labs running R&D kind of stuff, right? But the VO2 Master that you've probably seen, like little blue mask with a white piece on it, that you've probably seen more people in like socials, fitness testing stuff using. That thing's like $6,000, so a way better price point compared to the $40,000 ones. It just has a VO2 sensor, it doesn't have a CO2 sensor, so it's not, you can't technically get caloric expenditure truly. You get oxygen consumption. You can make some assumptions, but it's pretty good. The reliability testing I've done on it, like it's not as good as like my big lab grade cart, but it's not bad. Like we were able, basically proof of concept was like we were able to the same 3-4% benefit we saw in my study back like on our lab grade metabolic cart with the Alphafly. We saw with this portable device, both on the treadmill and the roads. So we were able to discern the same like group mean differences.
Sure.
Which gives me like enough confidence, at least at the group level, to like say this device works pretty good. I have more confidence giving advice to like elite athletes if we're using our lab grade cart,
right?
or if I'm using that cart, the mobile device that's more noisy, like I want to do more repetitions or more trials to make sure we cut down on some of that noise, especially when like giving someone like you recommendations. But like with our lab grade one, it's a little easier to do that. So yeah, it works pretty good. The one issue with that portable one we've had is at faster paces, it'll like deflate some of the readings because like the airflow into it, like in the reverse direction. Like if you were to go cycle in it, like it would like deflate the readings bad.
Yeah.
But like when we've been using it on the trails, like the values make sense for like the paces compared to the treadmill. But when people were running really fast on the roads with it, like it deflated those values some. Oh, but it's still the percent differences were similar. So
okay.
So yeah, I think that's what you want. That's the same device if you see like the Norwegian group of triathletes, Olav. Who are those? The names escape me right now. The elite Blumenfeld and Gustav Eden. Their coach who's on everything. They're like partner with that company for that device. Yeah. They're using it. So I think it takes a little bit more like kind of like adapting to what the numbers are giving you and like. But I do think there are some devices like that are like making it a little more feasible. But at the same time, I'm seeing there's some other one out right now that's like the thing doesn't even like cover your whole mouth.
Okay.
Like just like sits right here. And I'm like, how is that gonna get any kind of reading? And that's like a $600 device. People would message me on Instagram about it. They're like, hey, do you think this thing would work? I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, I wonder if they have any sort of, have they, you'd think they would, well, maybe they don't want to, but like they would test it alongside some of the setup that you have.
Yeah, there is. And there is some studies like that. Actually, there's just a recent paper that was giving more credence to that VO2 Master, especially against like the other mobile, the high end mobile cart that's out there. So there are some papers like that, but I think it's kind of like one of those things they're talking about though. Like if you're using any kind of tech, just blindly accepting the numbers it gives you versus like running some of your own reliability statistics on it and then like using that to make interpretations on like kind of magnitudes of differences between interventions. You can't just kind of blindly go at it. Like it takes a little bit more skill. I think that's where like a good sports scientist, right, is not just like handing you exactly back what the software said, like blindly, right?
Right.
Like,
yeah.
There's some interpretation that still needs to be done. Right? Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Are we missing anything? What are we missing?
You talked about your 100-mile shoes earlier. So another thing that always comes up is like how long do these shoes last for? Right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And I've heard both ends of the spectrum. Like people be like, "Oh no, well, you saw the marketing originally behind like the $500 Adidas shoe, which they kind of backtracked, I think."
Yeah.
And said, "Oh no, maybe it's not just that, right?" I think for like the Zoom X foam, at least from what I've tested, is like running economy at a fresh pair of Alpha Flies. Now they've also got like the pod element, right? The air pod element. So maybe it's not just the foam, longevity of the foam, but that like air pressured pod maybe lasts forever.
Yeah.
If it's not popped, whatever. But I had a pair that I tested fresh, a pair that had 250 miles and like almost no difference. Like
okay.
4.5%.
Oh, wow.
Benefit compared to my standard control shoe. So with 250 miles on them, and I got that pair up to like 500 or 600 miles, and I never retested them, which I should have, because I'm still pretty sure it's like to beat the most of the market for me personally, at least. The upper is more worn down than anything. I duct taped the upper before I feel like the shoe totally feels flat. But
which at the price points people would do if they knew it was going to give them the same.
Yeah. So I think that the good foams probably last. Now there's different ways they foam out the foam too that like might affect that longevity, but I think for like standard stuff like that, I think it's pretty good actually, not bad. And I think Jeff's got some of the materials testing, like foam deformation, like loading data that would show that for some old pairs of his that do pretty good still in terms of compliance resilience.
Now, is that because like when I think about a shoe with 250 miles on it, I think of that spaced out over weeks or months of training. What about 100 miles straight without any break? Does that change that relationship?
Well, I think there is some stuff. I'd have to go dig for papers, but there is some stuff I think on like how long it takes for foam to rebound and like some like actual imaging studies, like imaging of the foam compression, like how long it takes to return, right? So whether or not that would show up in lab testing and economy, right? Like you could look at the materials testing of that. From more of like an engineering imaging standpoint, but whether or not that would show up in like the economy, we could test you. Go beat the hell out of a pair of shoes for a few hours, and then you almost need like someone to like if we want to keep you as a like not a variable in that equation, you need somebody else to go like hammer the shoes
or get one of those like robot machines.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. There's a guy out in California who does a bunch of the Helix is the company. They do a bunch of the testing for the shoe companies, and he's got like a machine that does that. Yeah,
just pounds it down. Yeah, because I was always thought about that. I was wondering like, maybe I switch a pair at 100K just to get a fresh pair on, but sounds like it's either. It sounds like from a longevity standpoint, that wouldn't be necessary. It'd be more of a question of just within that time frame.
Yeah. I think to my point, I was talking more about just accumulated wear on the shoe. Like the shoe's not been hit with 100 miles right before I test it. But yeah, we could. It's a good question. It's a good application to your stuff too.
We need to get like 5 people with the same shoe size and just have them each run 20 miles, and then I'll get on the treadmill and test it and see.
Yeah. That would be interesting.
But it's. I mean, I guess I could always hedge the bet and change anyway. And
yeah, definitely. If you get a quick change in, can always fill it out too, just see what it feels like.
Yeah, yeah.
But,
Yeah, that's true. You could have, I mean, I'll have a second set there anyway, just because it's better to have it and not need it,
yeah.
type of a thing. But yeah, I mean, with some of these controlled 100 milers, I mean, I'm usually stopping. I think my fastest, I stopped, I think maybe 2 to 3 minutes total. It was just bathroom breaks. And then my fastest time prior to that, I think was like 60, maybe 90 seconds total.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot of downtime in there, but I wonder if there'd be a way to just pair it up where it's like, all right, I'm going to use the bathroom, bring me my shoes. I'm going to try to do two things at once.
Yeah.
Here.
If you put those quick laces, those stretch laces
Yeah,
on, I'm like,
that's probably the move.
it's seconds.
Just quick do it.
Yeah. Yeah, and you got me thinking. I always like have the wheels turning. I was like 10 studies in my head, and I can only do one of them.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
But like a case study test, you got the wheels turning in my head of like whether or not we could design something to do that. Because on that a similar note of that, like the question of like, do the shoes benefit you more later in a race? Like those, it's hard to pull off those studies because you gotta like have to have someone come in, run fresh, go run for 2 hours, test them again. Like it's just way harder to do that than bring you in the lab for just an hour and a half.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I did think of something I was going to ask you. I saw online someone had like this, I think it was just like it's either a web page or like a Google Sheets thing where they had like just a bunch of inputs where you could put in like, this is my marathon PR in just a standard pair of running shoes. If I put on super shoes, and it was like a translation chart.
Yeah.
Do you think that's pretty way off, or?
Well, it depends on.
I guess you'd probably have to see the back end of the equation.
Yeah, so there's one I would give you to use, which is when I was talking about like the rule of thumb of like 3% economy benefit, around 2% velocity improvement. That's modeled off of this paper published by Shalea Kipp, who's a really fast runner, competitive runner herself.
Yeah.
With that paper, they have a Excel file that has a calculator.
I wonder if that's where I got it.
If it was like a complicated looking Excel file, then
yeah, I'll send it to you and see what you think.
Yeah,
maybe it's the same thing.
If it's that paper, then yeah, that's probably like the best modeling that's out there. If it's from that one from that paper, but you have to know your economy input first, which would come from the lab, and then you put in your paces, and it scales that economy to time benefit based on paces and body surface area and all this. But yeah, I like that one. I think it's reasonable.
Yeah. Cool. Dustin, where can people find you?
So if you want some old, outdated Instagram content, Lab Rat Rundown.
It's good stuff still.
Yeah, it's
it
like,
lives
that's
forever.
The thing. You know, that's the thing about Instagram, right? Is like the algorithm only benefits stuff that happened in the last 24 hours.
Yeah.
But like, I have never posted a bunch of stuff to that Instagram, so it's not that hard to go back and scroll through and see all of these studies I'm talking about and all the case study testing I've talked about. Like, so yeah, it lives there as kind of like a log for that. It's just like the algorithm's not going to show you my account anymore because I don't do much with it. But
until we go and share it on our stories.
Yeah, and then my lab, it's Endurance Performance Lab, which it's long name, but you can spell that out. You'll find me for my lab on Instagram on that now, and so that's my lab at St. Ed's. And one of the things I'm trying to do is expand like community-based testing services, right? Like it gives my students practicum training. It generates a small amount of money to help fund research studies in our lab, and like it's the lowest cost exercise testing people are ever going to do, and it's with physiologists, PhD, running researchers. So I think it's a good gig, good deal. So they can find me at Endurance Performance Lab if they're in the Austin area or come through Austin and want to test.
Right on.
The lab website's linked on there. Yeah.
Cool. And they can know that they're funding some future super shoot research.
Yeah, it's like to do fun projects, like if you want to pay your salary, which I don't have to do because I'm at a teaching institution, like my main job is teaching, right? Like, so to do fun research projects, you just need a few $1,000s here and there. So it's like, if I can generate some money, we're going to do a cool Martin bicarb thing this summer.
Oh, cool.
I've been kicking around creatine running economy thing lately. So yeah. And then future Stu purchases stuff. So definitely.
Right on. Well, Dustin, it's been great to chat. We'll have to have you back on in the future when some new
we'll get you guys in the lab, get some video, and go over your results there.
I'll be curious because I think Brady and I have pretty different gait cycles, so
I
think we'll get maybe some differences between the two of us. But
cool, that'd be great.
We'll see. So awesome. Well, thanks so much for some time.
Yeah, man. Thanks.
Thanks for sticking around to listen to how I use the show sponsors. Maui Nui Venison is a product I discovered last year. What caught my eye was their quality and business model. They have paired the need to manage an invasive species with providing some of the most nutrient-dense meat you will find. The access deer arrived in Maui in single digits, but grew fast and have damaged the local ecosystem, and if left unchecked, are projected to reach up to 200,000 in number in the future years. Maui Nui decided to solve this problem and minimize waste. Access deer meat provides 43% of your daily value of protein in just 107 calories and boasts a 1.5 to 1 omega 6 to omega 3 ratio, which is the most balanced ratio of any red meat. This same 107 calories provides 22% of your daily value of vitamins and 37% of your daily value of minerals. They have a wide range of products, including ground venison, leg medallions, rib chops, strip loin, loin fillet, and loin chops. They also make a beef stick that includes an option with organ meats, which makes a perfect protein packed snack that I will usually have in the afternoon before a strength session. I have also been enjoying the ground venison for dinner, usually paired with steamed vegetables or sweet potatoes. You can find a bunch of recipes and ways to prepare their products on their website at mauinuivenison.com. That's mauinuivenison.com. Element Electrolytes is my go-to electrolyte supplement. Based on my electrolyte loss rates of 614 milligrams per liter, I begin my day with half a packet of one of their hot beverage flavors with my morning coffee. I rotate through all of them, but my favorite at the moment is the chocolate mint. Later in the day, I have been having either a packet of their watermelon flavor or a can of their newer product, Element Sparkling, which is their carbonated electrolyte drink. I usually have the black cherry lime or watermelon flavor for those. If you're curious about how to dial in your own fluid and electrolyte setup, check out episode 300 of this podcast, where I dive into some of the things you can do at home to gauge how much fluid and electrolytes you may be needing in your lifestyle. Delta G ketones is the best researched exogenous ketone supplement on the market. The research on exogenous ketones is constantly evolving. Delta G is responsible for much of it, boasting 50 plus published studies and 20 plus ongoing studies, and have received DARPA grants designed for special forces. Delta G uses ketone esters, which is unmatched in raising blood ketone levels when matched per gram. The best use case, as the evidence currently stands, is as a post-workout supplement for better recovery and or during longer, lower intensity sessions to help with mental focus. For this reason, I will have a bottle of Delta G Performance, that's their blue bottle, after my biggest workouts for the week and during long run training sessions once I have been out running for 45 to 60 minutes. Some promos for listeners from these brands include a free sample pack of the key flavors of Element by heading to drinklmnt.com/HPO. 20% off your next order of Delta G ketones at deltagketones.com with promo code BITTER20. And if you want to check out Maui Nui Venison, head over to mauinuivenison.com. You can find links and details to all those in the show notes and on the episode landing page. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast with Zach Bitter.